Okay, so this next book is probably my favorite read of the month. Even with the audiobook help, I DNF'd this book. Hello my lovelies, welcome back. My name is Fidi for those of you who are new here. As y'all saw or read in the title, this is my May reading wrap. I'm going to be going over all the books I read for May. But before we actually start this reading wrap, I want to give a little bit of a channel update. So I've decided for my own mental state that I'm going to take a mini break from YouTube just because work is really stressful right now. My life feels kind of like chaotic and I needed to offload some things in order for me to not overstress, be living with anxiety every day. And YouTube is one of those things where I love doing YouTube and I really like creating videos for you all, but I need a break. And I feel like this little break will also help with creativity for the future. That way I don't burn out. I am gonna take a small break after this video is uploaded. I will be taking about 4 weeks off, so there won't be any videos for the next 4 weeks. I'm thinking probably my next video is going to be somewhere around end of July, early August, depending on how long I take off a break. For my own sanity, we're going to offload YouTube for a bit and we'll come back stronger than ever. So if y'all are new here, I'm sorry if this is the first video you all see, but I promise I'll be back. I just need a break. I really do need a break. That's it. Oh my god, it's getting hot already. Let's take this off. That's the channel update. Other than that, I have nothing else to say. This is our usual monthly reading wrap. I don't have the books here with me. I do have my iPad on here to be able to go over all my notes. So without making this any longer than it has to be, grab a drink, get cozy, and let's get started with this video. I will be reviewing a total of 12 books in this video. However, 2 of them, I will admit that I started reading them and finished them the first week of June. So technically, those 2 extra books are part of June. However, since it's all within a series, I wanted to just review the full series together, so we're adding it to our May reading wrap. So in total for May, I read 10 books, but I'm reviewing a total of 12 books. And then within those 12 books, 7 of them were physical books and the other 5 were digital, so I read them on my Kindle. And out of the full 12 books, 7 of them had audiobook help. Oh, and I keep saying 12 books. I read 12 books, but I DNF'd 1, so I did not finish 1, which means in total I actually read 11, not 12. Sorry, I know, math. I just remembered I DNF'd the book. And then no, we are not having our caffeinated drink for today because I already had my caffeinated drink just a few hours ago and I do not want to have a panic attack in the middle of recording, so we are drinking water instead. So the first book we picked up in May was The Thorn Queen by Sasha Payton Smith. This is the second book to The Rose Bargain. This is a young adult romance fantasy. This I read it in hardcover and I listened to parts of it through audiobook as well. For The Thorn Queen, I did give it a 2.5 out of 5. There's no spice in this specific book. This is the second book in a duology, so I'm not going to give a summary because it will spoil what happens in the first book. I was really looking forward to this book because The Rose Bargain felt so fun to me. It had a very whimsical feel. It was very folklore inspired, and I think one of the best parts of this book was that it was a fantasy set in the Regency era of England. It felt like Bridgerton and the Crow Prince met and had a baby, and this was the baby. While I did enjoy some parts of The Thorn Queen, I ultimately just walked away feeling like I wanted more from it. With the writing style feeling whimsy, that's actually one of the strongest parts of the book for me. I really liked the writing style. It really did make me feel like I was in this world. However, even if you have like beautiful writing, if you don't have the characters solid or the plot solid, that's where it kind of loses me, and that's what happened. I remember Ivy in the first book was just so clever. For some reason in the second book it didn't translate well. We were constantly told how clever she is, but there wasn't enough actions to actually see how clever she was. I don't like being told when someone has a certain attribute. I prefer to see it play out and then me come up with that conclusion. Then we have Bram and Emmett, the prince, the royalty. It might be controversial, it might be a hot take, but I am still very much Team Bram. I feel like Bram just had so much potential to be such an interesting character, to be so complex. With Emmett, I never really liked him as a love interest. He felt very flat to me. I feel like there wasn't a lot of dimension. And even in this book where he goes through trauma, you could have peeled away some layers and showed us who Emmett is at his core, especially after everything he's been through. How is that going to shape his personality? How is that going to change him? Instead, once again, I feel like we were told rather than shown. I feel like for both Bram and Emmett, we kind of just like scratched the surface of who they were, when both stories could have been so interesting if we just knew who they were outside of this romance plot. Emmett especially felt like he was just created for Ivy as just a love interest. My biggest complaints about the story was the side characters. One of the big things of the Rose Bargain was the friendships that were developed throughout the story, and these side characters were kind of forgotten in the second book. Marian and Faith were included in the book. Everyone else was just like gone. Marian and Faith were the only ones who were there throughout the whole book, and even then they felt like an afterthought. What would have been so interesting is that these characters were exploring a completely new world. How would have this new world impacted them and their relationship, the society there? Would they have been accepted? Would they have been rejected? But again, they were treated as an afterthought, almost like the author remembered that they were part of the story and they had to include them here and there randomly. As for plot and world building, we were introduced to a completely new world, and it would have been very interesting to see what was the society like, what were the politics like, what was the culture like. Yes, we got descriptions of what the world was, and that was very nice, but how did people interact in this world? But we had the smallest of world building, and then rather than explore this new world and navigate this new world trying to figure out how to achieve the end goal of this plot, we were put into another set of trials. And the trials themselves felt very disconnected. I'm just like,
what is this? Why are we doing trials? Why is this set up this way? I don't know.
It made the middle part of the book just drag, and I got bored, and I just did not enjoy it as much as I would have liked. There was a lot of themes in this book that covered very sensitive subjects, and a lot of the times it felt like it was glossed over. And I'm not sure if it's because this is a YA book that it was glossed over, but I feel like you could explore these kind of heavier topics still within the age range that you're trying to target. At the end of the day, what it felt like was that it was just creating trauma just for the sake of trauma. And instead of being dramatic and impactful, being able to focus on the emotional consequences as well of these traumatic experiences that these characters went through. I just did not like how it was approached. So just final thoughts for this. Yes, I liked the writing. Yes, I liked the other world and how whimsical it felt. It was a unique idea, but at the end of the day, I felt like it just did not live up to what the first book was. But it didn't happen, and that's why I ended up giving it a 2.5 out of 5. Technically, this was the first book I picked up and I accidentally skipped over it. I ended up reading Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. I read this in paperback format, and I also did have some audiobook help. And I rated this book a 4 out of 5 with some spice of 2 out of 5. So just a quick summary. The story follows Eve, who typically is not the person who has a one-night stand. And the one time she decides to have a one-night stand, she's part of that 2% where a condom does not work. It did not break or anything like that. It just did not work, and she ends up pregnant. So the story follows her trying to navigate being pregnant while her best friend Willa is having a hard time conceiving her own kids, and she can't rely on the baby daddy because he has his own drama going on as well. So the only person she ends up being able to turn to is her best friend's brother, Shep, who always has the right things to say. Oh, whoops. I said 4 out of 5. I meant to say 4.5 out of 5. My bad. I wrote this down wrong. I don't mind a pregnancy trope. If I know it's happening, I'm more inclined to read it because I choose to read it rather than being surprised by it. But honestly, I'm not the type of person who gets the ick when it comes to pregnancy trope. I know it's not for everyone. Just know that this story is about a woman who is going through an unplanned pregnancy. Honestly, this book was so much sweeter than I thought it was going to be. I really enjoyed this story. Yes, it was messy, it was emotional, it was full of drama. Of course, there is drama, but underneath it all, it honestly just felt like a warm hug. It was a very hopeful and optimistic story. The writing style helped some of the heavier topics feel a lot lighter. Eve's internal monologues often provide a lot of comedic relief. However, the humor never took away from those emotional moments. The book was able to balance serious conversations, emotional growth, and lighter and funnier moments. And honestly, the dialogue is what stood out the most. It had some of the cutest quotes that I've come across when it comes to romance books. For example, this is Eve talking to Shep. "You have the time, I ask. I don't care. I'll quit. Where are you?" That's so cute. So yeah, that was a very simple dialogue, but the meaning behind it, the actions behind it was just so cute. Another quote that I have on here was, "It's a novel idea because if it's not just me taking care of my body, if listening to my body means that it's taking care of me too, then maybe, just maybe, I'm not completely alone." For characters, we're going to talk about our main characters and then some of the side characters. So starting off with Eve. Eve struggles with not knowing what exactly she wants out of life. The unexpected pregnancy really forces her to focus on her future, her relationships, and her own needs. And throughout the story, she learns to be more assertive, she learns to take up more space, and to actually advocate for herself. There were definitely moments where I wanted her to be more upfront about her feelings, but eventually she worked up to that. The next character is Willa. Willa and Eve's friendship was one of my favorite parts of the book. Their relationship felt genuine and supportive while still having problems the way every relationship does. I really love that they processed their emotions when they needed that time to process their emotions. They also eventually communicated with each other after processing those emotions, so there was no miscommunication between them. It all aired out at some point. They also gave each other grace, which is why this relationship felt supportive, because yes, they were able to discuss how they were feeling about things, but they also understood where the other person was coming from. I will say there is a bit of a trigger warning here. Willa does struggle with fertility issues. This impacts her ability to show up for Eve at times. So yes, her reactions did feel realistic. Yes, it was frustrating, but that's exactly how both characters were feeling. It felt very genuine. It felt like I was reading about real people. Now Shep. Shep was an absolute sweetheart. He was like the best book boyfriend, the most fictional book boyfriend I've ever read. Total golden retriever energy. He was a friend. He was a support system. And he was just a very steady presence for Eve. He was her rock. I loved how patient he was. He was such a green flag. He never pushed Eve, never forced his feelings on her. He gave her the space and took only what she was willing to give. Characters like this sometimes feel a little bit too perfect, but I feel like this was actually a really good balance for Willa and Eve. And then of course we're going to touch on Ethan really quick, the baby daddy. Even though Ethan was the baby daddy, he was surprisingly a very mature character, even when he was an imperfect character as well. He was definitely my least favorite, but not because he was a bad character. He was just not the main focus for the book. Also, I think it's just mostly because Eve always had to be the level-headed one. She always had to be the one to bring down his panic. That kind of just made me like him a little bit less, because she also needed that support that he wasn't necessarily providing at the time. But I mean, you really can't fault him for his reactions. It is a very life-changing event that they're all going through. Also, he can't understand what Eve is feeling if she's not communicating, which was one of her problems that we talked about earlier. So like I said, I understand his reactions. Overall, I feel like he handled a difficult situation in a mature way while still being appropriately scared about everything that was going on. It was realistic. I'm not going to fault him for how he reacted. It just made sense for the story and for who he was. So, final thoughts. This book surprised me. I liked it so much. I like how realistic parts of it felt while still living in that fictional world of what a book creates. The relationships, especially the friendships, were just the heart of the story, and it was just so cute, so wholesome. I love this book. Definitely would recommend. So the next book I picked up is the third book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and that is The Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook by Matt Dinniman. I read this in physical format. It was a hardcover, and I did have some audiobook help with this one. I rated this a 4 out of 5. As I mentioned, this is the third book in a series, so I'm not going to go too much into detail for the summary. All you need to know is that Carl and Princess Donna are on the 4th floor of the dungeon, and this floor is all about trains. Now, this book by far has been the most confusing one in the series, and it's because of the map they had in this book. book. Granted, I'm only in book 3. I don't know how much more confusing this book is going to get, but it's not confusing in a bad way. I'm still very much entertained. I just have no clue what's going on half the time. For the plot / world building, as I mentioned, the most difficult part for me to follow was the train. The system was just very confusing. However, the general direction of the story wasn't that confusing. I was still able to follow along. We also continued to get some hints throughout the story of Borant being up to something and there being just a bigger picture unfolding outside of the dungeon. As for characters, Katya is the new addition to Princess Donut's royal court. She gave some questionable vibes, but eventually she grew on me. I think I especially enjoyed seeing her gain her confidence and become a lot more comfortable with herself and the group. By the end of the 3rd book, I was definitely more invested in her character than I expected to be. Carl and Princess Donut are still my favorite duo. They are so unconventional, however they complement each other so well. I love their dynamic. Their relationship is so fun. Their interactions is what brings a lot of humor to the story. Time for quotes because these are so funny not to talk about. So the first quote here, Carl is talking to Donut and then Donut answers, "Nobody's starting a harem." "No, I suppose not," Donut said. "You couldn't even keep one woman interested." Donut coming in for the kill. Another quote. "I wasn't just going to abandon you, Carl," Donut said. "Who do you think I am? Miss Beatrice?" It's both funny and so heartwarming. Like, this duo is just literally the reason why the story is so good. Even in the serious moments, they still keep the story fun. One thing I noticed about this book is that the tone of the story felt a little bit different. It definitely feels like the stakes are getting higher, the consequences are getting so much bigger, and in general, the story is starting to shift a little. The characters are constantly being reminded that they can die. The mortality of these characters is not something tangible to me. However, as the story progressed and the tone of the story kind of shifted a little bit more, I can see how this is starting to grow into something a little bit bigger. So overall, I had a great time with this book. It was so much fun. It was still funny while still being very much confused on what is going on in this book. So after that, I finally picked up The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I read this in paperback, and this for me was a 5 out of 5. So quick disclaimer, this was one of my favorite stories when I was a teenager. This series has a special place in my heart, so I might have a bias coming in because I already had a lot of love towards the series going in. Arguably, it is still a really great book. This story is set in a dystopian world where there are 12 districts. Each district has to send a boy and a girl from ages 12 to 17 to fight in the Hunger Games to the death. In this story specifically, Katniss Everdeen actually ends up volunteering for her sister since her sister's the one that got picked to go to the Hunger Games. And the story just follows Katniss trying to survive the games and to get back to her family. That's a very summarized version. Like I mentioned, hands down for me, 5 stars. I knew there was a possibility of it not holding up to 5 stars, but this is one of those books that regardless of the age, you're still going to enjoy. So Suzanne Collins does a great job of writing a story that is accessible to a young age while still offering plenty for adults to appreciate as well. The writing is simple but effective, especially through Katniss' reflections of her own past. She's able to give that vivid description without having to rely on overly describing a situation. Those memories add so much depth to not only the world but to the character itself, because we are getting to know this character while still understand the situation that she is in. I think what hit me hardest as an adult is that despite everything that Katniss went through, she is still at the end of the day a kid. When I was a kid, all I could see is,
wow, this very brave character is going through all of this. She is awesome.
But now, as someone closer to 30, I'm just like,
she's a child. A child had to go through all of these traumatic experiences.
There's definitely a different perspective being an adult and reading these books. So the story was of course a cautionary tale in a very classic dystopian fashion. Revisiting the story as an adult made some of the parallels feel surprisingly relevant and very unsettling. Definitely a lot of social commentary went right over my head when I read these books at like age 13. So final thoughts, these books are as good as I remember them to be, they still hold up. I'm still very much entertained throughout these stories. It is very heartbreaking, and I am very excited to continue the rest of the series and see how my experience is reading the new books as well. So now we're jumping on my 24-hour reading marathon, readathon, reading challenge territory. These next 3 books are part of that readathon. I feel like the rating, at least for the last 2 books, might not be completely accurate because of how delirious I was from lack of sleep. The first full book in that readathon was Game On by Navessa Allen. I read this on paperback, and I also had some audiobook help with this one. I rated this a 4 out of 5, and for Spice, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. To keep the summary short and quick, Tyler is using Stella to get revenge on his dad by fake dating Stella, and Stella is fake dating Tyler to clear her brother's debt. There's a lot more to the story, but that's just quick short summary. This is the final book in the Into Darkness series. This is the 3rd book. This was spicy. There was a lot of sarcastic tones with a hint of darkness. This is, I think I forgot to mention, a dark rom-com. It feels a lot like the first book with the dark rom-com aspect. It focuses heavily on the characters and their chemistry and just the romance and the spiciness of it all. There's a lot of inner monologue and a lot of dialogue when it comes to this writing. And it also includes a lot of pop culture references, which is honestly not for everyone. It's not always for me. I didn't mind it in this book, but I know sometimes that's one of my pet peeves. For plots, it uses familiar tropes. Now that I'm trying to talk about it, it's not necessarily a revolutionary story. Fake dating drives the main conflict. Forced proximity forces the characters to develop feelings for each other, and a lot of it is surface level. We do get to kind of go a little bit into more depth for each character, but not too deep to the point where we know the characters extremely well. We just know that they come with their own issues. And I will say the ending did feel slightly rushed and just very convenient on how it ended. As for characters and impression, Tyler, oh my god. Somehow Navessa Allen made me enjoy a blonde main love interest, which is kind of funny. But at the same time, Tyler was a gym bro, which gave me the ick so bad at the beginning. But eventually he grew on me, and it was just like, because it's just more of a persona. I don't know. Tyler was just an interesting character. Stella, personally, aside from her having like tattoos and being like a tattoo artist, left less of an impact on me. And I know not a lot of people enjoyed this one, but personally for me, I did enjoy this story. Overall, this was honestly the perfect book to read for my readathon. It wasn't overly complicated. It was something I enjoyed, and it was something I was able to get through. I love the Ali and Josh cameos, and honestly, it was a very satisfying conclusion to the series. If you want to go into more detail on how I reacted and what I think about this book, you should definitely go see that 24-hour readathon video. If you hear any noises in the background, my boyfriend's currently cleaning the bathroom, so there's going to be some random noises that I might not be able to edit out. Just a heads up. Now, the book that we are talking about now is A Fate Inked in Blood by Daniel L. Jensen. I read this in hardcover, and I did have a lot of audiobook help. If I'm being honest, this was mostly audiobook with reading here and there because it was just hard to follow, and I was very tired at that point. I did rate this a 3.5 out of 5, and for Spice, I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. This book was, of course, still part of the readathon challenge. Now, I'm going to try my best to summarize this book. In fact, I'm going to read it off my notes because this one was just really hard for me to explain. Freya is the Shield Maiden and has kept a secret her whole life. That was until her husband exposed her secret to the Jarl Snorri, and now she is forced to marry another man because she is the prophesized Shield Maiden that will unite the clans under one king. And Snorri wants to be that king. Now, with the protection of the Jarl's son, Yorn, she must navigate their challenges to fulfill her destiny. Wow, I did such a good job of summarizing this in written format. Okay. Anyway, I hope that made sense. Yeah, this was hard to follow for me. And the audiobook helped a lot. It has nothing to do with the writing, more to do with the fact that I was just tired of reading at that point. I was reading all day. I had not really had a break. So of course, my reading experience was going to be very different. I do feel like this is one of those books I would have liked a lot more if not read during a readathon. But who knows? Maybe I'll reread it later in the future, I'm not sure. Despite all of that, there was still a lot of parts I enjoyed. So for writing style, yes, it was hard to follow because there was a lot of terminology that I was not used to. This is inspired by Norse mythology and by Viking stories. It was also a little bit difficult to read because it included a lot of words that were hard to pronounce because there was no pronunciation guide. So audiobook help came through big time because of that. And as for the world building, I just had a hard time with the world building. I think in that moment, I just did not need a book where world building was so complex, even though that's something I very much enjoy. This is why I feel like this book would have been so much better if my brain was fully there, but it wasn't. The magic system really did feel unique because of the Norse mythology influence. Even with my sleep-deprived brain, I definitely could appreciate that this romantasy felt a little bit more unique because of that. But as the story progressed, I couldn't understand anything other than Freya being the shield maiden. Why were the territories fighting? Why was Snorri the obvious king? Why did everyone hate Snorri? Like, I hated Snorri, but I hated him because of other reasons. But like, is this why everyone else hated him? Like, I don't know. The plot didn't feel fleshed out necessarily, and I don't know if that was a me thing or if that was a book thing. A lot of this book review is going to feel very unsure because I just don't know how much of it was just me not having the capacity to fully process what I was reading. The romance between Freya and Jorn was very cute at the beginning. I really liked it, but then as the story progressed, it kind of fell off for me. And that could have been because the characters felt very one-dimensional. Like Freya, for example, we were told she was the chosen one, she loves her family, she would sacrifice herself for her family, but like, why? I feel like that wasn't really explored that much. And then Jorn, he might be explored a little bit more in the next book, but honestly, to me, he was just the hot bodyguard, and that's kind of it. I was just left with too many questions. There were not enough details for me to be sold on the story, or I just glossed over the details. I don't know which one it is. But I will say, I did swoon when he called her his. Overall, I feel like I'm being very overly critical about this book, and a lot of it is my fault because I could not process what I was reading. I know that the audiobook really helped me though, and I think that if it wasn't for the audiobook, I would have not finished this book specifically, just because it did feel a little bit too complex for how late it was when I was reading this and how late in the challenge it was as well. 3.5 out of 5 because like I said, I still enjoyed a good part. I know I complained a lot about it, but it's just because again, I was just confused. But I did enjoy a lot of this book. I think I should give it another chance. I don't know. Let me know what you think. And now the last book I read on this readathon, I did not finish it, but I read half of it in this reading challenge, and it was the last half when my brain was fully fried and sleep deprived. So I feel like the rating could have been a little bit higher, but at least for the other half, it makes sense for me. And that is Mile High by Liz Tomford. I read this on my Kindle, and I also had a little bit of audiobook help for this one. I did rate this book a 3.5 out of 5, and as for Spice, I gave it a 2.5, but I literally put, don't trust my rating, I was literally falling asleep. I think it might have been spicier, but I genuinely can't remember how spicy it was. This story is about Stevie, who's a flight attendant for this hockey team, and Sander, who is the typical bad boy hockey player. And it's a story about them and their relationship and the chemistry they have and all of the fun stuff involving a sports romance. So again, this was the last book I read in that 24-hour reading challenge. I was heavily sleep deprived, so the first half of the book might not be fully accurate, but I did enjoy the second half so much. This book helped spark that like kick of sports romances. If you know me, I'm not one to read sports romances. I don't seek them out. I'll read them when they're recommended to me, and sometimes like if they're popular, I'm just like,
okay, why not? Let's try it out.
But this one definitely kickstarted that sports romance binge that I want to go on. The writing thankfully was not complicated at all, which was exactly what I needed for this reading challenge. It was easy, straightforward, simple to read. It definitely relies heavily on dialogue and banter to move the story forward. As for the plots and tropes, it's a classic sports romance. I will say that because these books are so well loved, I was expecting a little bit more than a typical sports romance. You know, it still got me. I still liked it. I will say one of the things I really do appreciate about the story is that the characters are pretty fleshed out for a rom-com. We understand why Sander is portraying to be this bad boy and how his past and his relationships influence this persona. We understand why Stevie has so many insecurities because, again, we understand how her family and her past relationships influence who she is now. I think that's what really sells the story, that the characters are more than surface level. I do feel like it's very typical for rom-coms to focus more on the chemistry, but this one definitely did focus a lot on the characters, which helped build the chemistry between them because they actually got to actively know each other. And as they got to know each other, we, the audience, also got to know the characters. Overall, I enjoyed myself. This was a good time and I really liked it. We're going to change my camera because the battery's dying. We'll be right back. Okay, so this next book is probably my favorite read of the month. This book is one of those books that I picked up and I put down because I was just not in the mood to read. And then finally, after a few years, I picked up again. And oh boy, am I glad of my decision to put it down when I did. Because if I had DNF'd this book or if I had tried to read this book when I was not in the mood, I would have not experienced what I experienced. I read the Mindfuck series by St. Abby. Stabby! I did read this on my Kindle and I rated this a 5 out of 5. And for spice, I gave it a 3. But in reality, while it was spicy and it was more than like vanilla spice, it didn't really focus on it too much in the grand scheme of it all. The Mindfuck series. I am calling it a series because it is technically a collection of 5 novellas. And that is, hold on, let me tell you what they are. The Risk, Sidetracked, Scarlet Angel, All the Lies, and Painted All Red. So I read all 5 novellas and they basically make a whole book. I'm counting it as a whole rather than 5 individual novellas. So this story follows Lana Myers, who has suffered a lot, but she refuses to be the victim and instead she decides she's going to kill every person that ruined her. And everything was going according to plan until she met Logan, who is an FBI agent. Wow, wow, wow. This book, oh my god, this series. Oh, I could not put it down. All I could think about was this series. Don't get me wrong, I forgot to say heavy trigger warnings for this one. If you're not into dark romances, then this one might not be for you. If you are, I still would very much recommend looking up the triggers because a lot of it was just very hard and heavy to read. This book / series definitely became one of my favorite series of all time. One of my favorite series of the year as well. All of them are 5s, all of them. So mind you, again, I was not into it the first time I was reading. I was just not in the mood. I was in a reading slump. I wanted to give it my full attention because I knew this was something I wanted to read. So I put it down. But the second time I picked it up, this book sucked me right in. It felt like I was watching a Criminal Minds episode. It was enticing, it was addictive. When I was finished with one book, I would jump straight into the next book. I was reading this nonstop, and when I was not reading this, I was thinking about it. There was a poetic feel to it while still being very gritty and suspenseful. I enjoyed the series a lot and I very much appreciate that they didn't glorify trauma. Instead, they showed how different people process traumatic experiences. As for characters, Lana freaking Myers, oh my god. She is one of my top main characters. She is one of those characters that I'm never going to forget. She is up there with Aylin. She's up there with Manon. We got to know Lana during the present of like when the story was happening. And we also got to know how Lana became a serial killer. She's intelligent, she's brave, she's so badass. Maybe the story could be unrealistic, but I didn't care. I was completely sold on Lana. And honestly, if I was part of Logan's team, I would also be compromised. Lana and Logan made so much sense together. They complemented each other so well. I really appreciate how quickly Logan was able to get his head out of his ass and grovel. And boy, did he grovel. And he was so quick to realize his mistakes and apologize. Actually apologize, not just kind of skirt around and hope to be forgiven. And after apologizing, he also proved it in action. So yes, they complemented each other really well. He was her rock. She was so understanding of like his job. Like it just made so much sense. These characters were so mature and their relationship was surprisingly healthy considering that this was a dark romance. Killing aside, serial killer life aside, they actually communicated a lot with each other and how they felt and when they needed help. They were just just very supportive of each other. Just overall, this book was everything for me. Like, oh my god. It had that suspense thriller aspect to it. We had a serial killer with an FBI agent, which was like a forbidden romance. We had such supportive characters, the friendships, the found family aspect. It was just all so good. I love this. If you are into dark romances and you haven't read the series and you're okay with the triggers that this book has, I would definitely recommend this book. Now, the next book I read, it might have been because I was coming from such a big high, but I ended up picking up One Golden Summer by Carly Fortune. I read this on paperback and I had audiobook help with it, and even with the audiobook help, I DNF'd this book. I'll just give a quick summary, my reasons for DNFing, and that's it. No rating because I DNF'd it. Oh, I don't even remember the characters' names. I literally wrote nothing for this because I DNF'd it. I believe this is part of an interconnected series. I really don't read Carly Fortune. I was saying that she was a hit or miss for me, and now I'm starting to realize that she isn't the author for me. And that's okay. If she is for you, I'm so happy for you. She's just not for me. But this story does follow Alice, who's taking care of her grandmother, who ended up having an accident and hurt her hip, and she had to get hip surgery, I believe. And so her grandmother was starting to get kind of depressed. We weren't necessarily told if it was depressed. She wasn't being herself. So Alice suggested that they go and vacation at the lake where they normally did with her grandmother's friends. The grandmother agreed, so they went to the house after asking, and it just follows the story of Alice trying to help her grandmother, and then she meets Charlie, who is a local, I believe, or something of the sorts, and a relationship between Charlie and Alice. Yeah, we kind of start to learn pretty early on Charlie is not really looking for a relationship. He is like a typical player. He likes Alice but can't be with her, and Alice wants to be with Charlie but understands that he can't be with her, and it's just kind of like a back and forth between them. The reason I DNF'd it is because I got bored. I'm starting to remember that that's kind of how I felt with the other book I read. I forgot what it was called, and I got bored with this one too, and I didn't really enjoy the characters. But even with the audiobook, I just couldn't get into it. I couldn't care enough for the characters, and again, it could have been that I just came from such a great story, and Carly Fortune already is not an author that I enjoy reading. I had to put it down because if I kept reading it, I was going to give it a low rating. So I tried. This is my second book from Carly Fortune, and I have discovered that I'm just not into her writing, and that's okay. I'm just going to have to find my summer romances somewhere else. The final book I read for May and the first two books I read for June are all part of a series called The Cruel Shifterverse. This is book 4, 5, and 6. If you have not read Psycho Shifter, Psycho Fae, or Psycho Beast by Jasmine Moss, definitely do not stay for this review. I cannot talk about these books without spoiling something major that happened in the first 3 books. If you have not read the first 3 books, thank you for watching, but this is the end of the reviews basically. If you have read the books, or if you don't care to be spoiled, I read Psycho Academy, Psycho Devils, and Psycho Gods, which is book 4, 5, and 6 of the Cruel Shifterverse series by Jasmine Moss. And I read all of these on my Kindle. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about these 3 books together. I did rate Psycho Academy and Psycho Devils 3 out of 5, and I rated Psycho Gods a 3.5 out of 5. And for spice, I did rate them a 3. However, the spice isn't necessarily the focus. It's just kinkier. It's not necessarily vanilla. It's a white juice. It's not super spicy. I don't know how to explain it. It's just spicy. It's a spicy book. I'm giving it a 3. I'm going to give just like an overall summary. I'm not going to summarize each book. These last 3 books in the Cruel Shifterverse series follows Erin battling with PTSD after having the word horror carved onto her back, eating her mom's heart, and becoming a queen. She is breaking down. Eventually, one day, someone shows up to her house and tells her, hey, you are a very powerful being and you have to go to this academy for all of these powerful beings. There's no choice. It's either you go or you die, something like that. So now she's being forced to be part of this academy with a group of people who do not like her. And she is pretending to be a boy once again. So I'll be honest, for these 3 books, I preferred Erin so much more as a main character. I really liked her story a lot more. In fact, Sadie became even more annoying in these books. And I had mentioned how Sadie kind of annoyed me towards the end. First 3 books. So yeah, it just got worse for me. The overall plot was interesting. Like the idea of her having to go to the school and like training and all of these trials. I'm starting to see a very heavy pattern of Jasmine Moss. In fact, this one very much reminded me of Blood of Hercules. I did enjoy the plot a little bit more. The only problem was that by the third book, I kind of got a little bit bored. Even though that one's rated a little bit higher, it's just because of the chemistry and the romance between the characters. The plot itself kind of dragged out for me. It got a little bit repetitive. I just wanted it to end. I wanted the people to stop suffering because they were all just going through so much to the point where I'm just like,
dude, just let them live. Like, literally, just let them live.
Which makes me appreciate the ending a lot more. I'll be straight up, this story was ridiculous. It was kind of dumb, but it was so funny and it was so entertaining and it was exactly what I wanted. Just the rapid fire of the characters. John, I loved John. I loved how supportive he was. I loved him from the moment he was introduced and everything else that happens with John's character. Loved it. Scorpius was another character I really enjoyed. I love the small things Scorpius noticed about her since he was blind and all. He had to rely more on his other senses and I really appreciated all of the little small things that no one else noticed but him, and I thought it was very cute. I really liked her relationship with Scorpius as well. I liked her relationship individually with all of these characters, but Scorpius and John were the ones that like stood out the most for me. I will say I was surprised with the plot twist in book 2. It revolves one of the characters. I was surprised by it. I did not see that one coming. It was very interesting. Again, my only complaint was that book 3 dragged out a little bit, but other than that, I had fun. Good vibe. I realized that this writing, this type of storytelling is not for everyone, but it was for me. It was a good time. I finally finished reading the Shifterverse series. It was good. I would give it in total a 3. But yeah, that's it for this video. Oh my god, we finally went through all of the books I read. Let me know down in the comments below, what was your favorite book for May? Mine was definitely the Mindfuck series. I will not stop thinking about that. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't done so already and you would like to, please subscribe. I usually make book content and now and then I make some lifestyle vlogs. I am going to take a little bit of a break, but I promise I will be back. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a beautiful day, a beautiful night, and happy reading. Bye!